Die faster, Jack. My lawyers are waiting. Catherine Drake whispered that into the ear of the man who had given her everything: his ring, his trust, his empire, while he lay paralyzed in a hospital bed and could not move a single finger to stop her. What Catherine didn't know was that Jack Carter heard every syllable. What she didn't know was that he had been listening for 9 days, storing, filing, waiting. She thought she was standing over a dying man. She was standing over a loaded gun, and she had just pulled the trigger on herself. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Die faster, Jack. My lawyers are waiting. Those were the 7th words Catherine Drake had spoken in this room today, and they were the ones that crystallized everything. Jack Carter did not move. He did not blink. His chest rose and fell in the measured rhythm of a man deeply unconscious, a rhythm he had practiced for 9 days with the same deliberate precision he had once used to practice closing arguments before hostile board meetings. His hands lay open at his sides. His face was slack. Every muscle in his body was performing stillness. Behind that stillness, his mind was running at full speed. He had built Carter Dynamics from a single warehouse in Detroit into a technology empire worth $11 billion. He had survived 3 hostile takeovers, 2 FBI investigations that went nowhere, and 1 attempt on his life that he had never publicly acknowledged. He had looked across tables at men who wanted to destroy him and had held his nerve every single time. He had never held it harder than right now. The car had gone off Route 918 days ago. The brakes had failed or had been made to fail, which was a distinction Jack had been turning over in his mind since the moment he woke up in this bed and understood that Marcus was dead and that Catherine Drake was sitting in the corner of his hospital room, not weeping, not praying, not doing any of the things a woman does when the man she loves nearly dies, but making phone calls in a low, controlled voice with her back turned to the bed like he was already furniture. The paralysis was real. The doctors had been careful and thorough about explaining it. Spinal compression, nerve inflammation, temporary, but significant. His legs didn't answer. His torso was locked. But his hands had sensation, his mind was intact, and his hearing was, if anything, sharper than it had ever been in his life. And Catherine talked around him constantly, as though silence were too honest. On day 2, she had called someone and said, "The Meridian Clause gives us 60 days. Start counting." On day 4, she had met with a man named Garrett Cole in the hallway and discussed $43 million with the flat efficiency of a grocery list. On day 6, she had told Lucas, his stepbrother, who arrived smelling of bourbon and ambition, that the board would move on a succession protocol as soon as the legal architecture was in place. Jack had stored all of it. And today, day 9, she had leaned over his bed and whispered 7 words that told him everything he needed to know about the woman he had spent 2 years planning to marry. Die faster, Jack. My lawyers are waiting, he breathed, slow, even, a man sleeping. The door opened 12 minutes after Catherine left, and a different set of footsteps came in. Not heels, soft soles, unhurried. The footsteps of someone who had nowhere more important to be than exactly here. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." The voice was warm without being performed, calm without being clinical. "I'm going to check your vitals and adjust your positioning. Is that all right?" She spoke to him as though she expected an answer, as though his silence was a temporary condition rather than a permanent fact. He didn't know her name yet. He would learn it was Lily Ford, 28, 3 years at Hargrove Memorial, the daughter of a school teacher from rural Ohio, who had paid her own way through nursing school with weekend diner shifts and a stubbornness her professors had called either admirable or impossible, depending on the week. But in that first moment, he knew her only by 2 things: her hands, which were steady and careful and moved around him without performing care, but actually delivering it, and the fact that when she repositioned his shoulder and said, "There, that's better," she said it for him, not for herself, as though it mattered whether he was comfortable, as though he was still a person. Jack Carter, who had not cried since the night his mother died 14 years ago, felt the muscles behind his eyes ache. Catherine returned the following morning with lawyers. Jack heard the document case being set on the table. He heard the phrase power of attorney and then medical, proxy, and then estate administration, each term dropping into the room like a stone into still water. He heard Catherine's voice moving through it all with the confidence of a woman who had memorized a script and believed in it completely. "He prepared these documents last year," she said. "Everything is in order. We'll need these notarized, a lawyer said. I have a notary standing by. Jack lay still and thought she brought a notary to my hospital room. He thought she planned this before I woke up from surgery. He thought she may have planned the surgery. That last thought was the one he'd been circling for 9 days, refusing to look at directly. Catherine's words that morning, "die faster," forced him to look. And what he saw when he looked was a sequence of events that fit together too neatly to be coincidence. The brake line, the timing, the prepared documents, the notary on standby. The cold that moved through him had nothing to do with anger. It was the cold of absolute clarity. The kind that comes when you stop hoping you're wrong. He needed to act, but action without preparation was just noise. And noise at this stage would only give Catherine time to regroup. She had lawyers and leverage and momentum. He had a paralyzed body and a mind no one knew was awake. He needed an ally, someone inside this room who wasn't already on Catherine's payroll. He needed to find out if Lily Ford was exactly who she appeared to be. That evening, Lily sat in the chair beside his bed and read to him. She hadn't asked permission. She just brought a paperback, settled in, and started. East of Eden, Steinbeck. Her voice was unhurried and completely genuine, the voice of someone reading because they wanted to, not because they were performing tenderness for an audience. He had read the book at 17 in a Detroit public library because the heat in his apartment building had been shut off and the library was warm. He had not thought about that in 30 years. Lily read for 40 minutes. When she stopped, she said, "I'll be back tomorrow, same time if that's okay with you." A pause. "I know you might not be able to hear me, but I figure silence isn't great company either way." She stood to leave. Jack moved his right hand, not dramatically, not in a convulsion or a reaching gesture, just his index finger pressing down twice against the mattress, a movement so small it could have been dismissed as reflexive. But it was not reflexive. It was the result of 4 hours of work that afternoon, 4 hours of forcing his concentration down through compressed neural pathways to find the one small motion he could produce reliably. Lily stopped. The room went perfectly still. "Mr. Carter," her voice was careful and completely calm, the voice of someone choosing calm deliberately. "If you can hear me, do that again." He did it again. She exhaled once, long and slow. Then she said in a voice so quiet it barely moved the air between them, "I don't know what's happening in this room, but I've been watching and I don't think everything here is what it looks like." A pause, but "If you're choosing to stay quiet, I'll keep your secret. But I need you to know you don't have to do this alone." Jack's finger pressed down a third time. It was not an answer to a question. It was something else. Something he hadn't felt since he was 17 years old in a warm library with a book about brothers and betrayal and what it means to be truly known. Lily understood. She didn't need a word for it either. "Rest," she said softly. "I'll be back." She left. In the hallway, he heard her exchange routine words with the night orderly. Her voice was steady and professional. She had told no one. She was already protecting him, and she barely knew him. And the fact of that simple and enormous sat in his chest like a weight that was somehow easier to carry than everything else he'd been holding. Lucas arrived the next morning without Catherine, which was unusual, and the difference in his manner was immediately apparent. Without her in the room, he was looser and rawer, the way certain people only are when they believe no one important is watching. He sat close. He didn't perform for any invisible audience. "I've spent 30 years in your shadow," Lucas said. His voice had an edge that wasn't anger, something rawer than anger. 30 years of Lucas isn't ready and the board needs more time and let's wait and see. "You said those things to my face, Jack. You thought they were kindnesses." He paused. "They weren't." Jack breathed. "I know you're in there," Lucas said. "You go completely still when you're paying attention. You got it from Dad. I've known it since we were kids." He leaned closer. "So here's what I need you to know. I'm not doing this because I hate you. I'm doing this because I've waited my whole life for something you were never going to give me voluntarily, and this is the only window I'll ever get." He stood, moved toward the door, stopped, turned back, and what was in his voice now was something that cut past strategy entirely. "I didn't know about the car, Jack. That wasn't me. I need you to know that." He left. Jack processed those 9 words for the rest of the afternoon. "I didn't know about the car. That wasn't me." Lucas was a schemer, an opportunist, But he was also, Jack had always known this and had tried not to count it as relevant, a man who needed to be believed even in the middle of his worst choices, who needed even while doing terrible things to have a line he hadn't crossed. He was telling the truth, which meant Catherine had manufactured the accident alone, which meant Jack had 9 days of evidence, a partial recovery he was carefully concealing, and a betrayal that had already crossed from corporate to criminal, and he needed to move before Catherine's legal architecture locked into place permanently. That night, Lily came in at midnight. She carried a small laminated letterboard, the kind used for nonverbal patient communication, and a notepad, and she positioned herself so her body blocked the door's window panel, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a breath. "I've been thinking about how to do this properly," she said. "We have about 30 minutes before the corridor changes. Can you work with the board?" His finger pressed once. Yes, she held the board where his hand could reach it. It cost him everything, every ounce of stored concentration, every nerve signal he could force down through the compression, but his finger moved across the letters, and Lily tracked each one without impatience, reading them back in a murmur, her pencil moving on the notepad. Reidandreus. "Reed Andrews," she said. "A person, one press. Yes. You want me to call him?" "One press, yes." She took down the number digit by digit, confirmed it back, then looked at his face. "What do I say?" He moved to the board again. TELLHIMJACKSATHESTORMCOMING. Lily read the phrase, looked up. "He'll know what it means. One press." She folded the notepad, tucked it in her pocket, paused at the door. "Good night, Mr. Carter," she said in her ordinary nurse's voice. "Rest well." The door closed. Jack Carter lay in this dark that had been his world for 9 days, and for the first time since the car left that mountain road, he felt something shift inside him, the specific sensation of a trap becoming a launch pad. Everything Catherine had built was about to meet something she had never planned for, never modeled, never considered. She had controlled every variable in this room. She had not controlled Lily Ford, and that was going to cost her everything. Reed Andrews had not slept in 18 days. He had driven to Hargrove Memorial the night of the accident and had been turned away by Catherine Drake herself, standing in the corridor with the precise, composed posture of a woman who had already decided who belonged inside the perimeter she was drawing. "Family only," she'd said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've known Jack since we were 19 years old," Reed had answered. "I know," Catherine had said, "but you're not family." He had driven home. He had waited. He had called Jack's direct line 14 times and gotten Catherine's voicemail every time, which meant she had Jack's phone, which meant she was filtering everything. He had contacted Bernard Holt, Jack's attorney, and Bernard had told him with careful, meaningful neutrality that he had been instructed to direct all inquiries through Ms. Drake's office, instructed by whom Reed had asked. Bernard had paused just long enough to mean something. Then he'd said, "Standing instructions from before the accident," and ended the call. Reed was sitting at his kitchen table at 12:47 a.m. with cold coffee and a legal pad covered in notes that were starting to feel like a wall he couldn't get through when his personal cell rang from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Mr. Andrews." The voice was young, female calm in the specific way of someone who had chosen calm rather than found it naturally. "My name is Lily Ford. I'm a nurse at Hargrove Memorial. I'm calling from a personal phone in the parking structure. I need you to listen carefully and not repeat anything I say until we've spoken again." Reed set down his pen. "Go ahead." "I have a message for you from Jack Carter." A breath. "He asked me to tell you Jack saw the storm coming." The kitchen went completely silent. Reed stood up from his chair before his mind gave the instruction. "Say that again." "Jack saw the storm coming." Reed's hand closed hard around the phone. That phrase existed in exactly one place in the world, a parking garage in Detroit 24 years ago after a business partner had tried to destroy everything they'd built, and Jack had dismantled every piece of it before the man could move. Reed had asked how he'd known. Jack had shrugged and said storms always telegraph themselves if you're paying attention. They had never used the phrase again, because they'd never needed to. "He's conscious," Reed said. "Limited motor function in his right hand. He's been communicating through finger movement. Tonight we used a letterboard. He's fully alert. He's heard everything for 9 days. 9 days. Reed closed his eyes. 9 days of Catherine walking through that room like she owned it, which legally she was in the process of ensuring she did, and Jack lying there storing every word, every name, every number. Who else knows? Reed asked. Just me, and now you. Does he know about the offshore accounts? A pause. He knows about $43 million and a man named Garrett. Garrett Cole, Reed said. The name tasted like copper. All right, what's your schedule? When can we talk again? Off at 6 tomorrow evening. I can call from the parking structure at 6:15. Do that. And Lily, don't change anything. Your manner with him, your routine, your body language on that floor. If Catherine's people notice any shift around him, they'll move. And if they move before we're ready, everything collapses. Can you hold that? I've been holding it for 9 days without knowing why, she said. I can hold it with a reason. Reed believed her. He didn't entirely understand why he knew nothing about this woman, but something in her voice was the specific sound of a person who was exactly what they appeared to be. He had met perhaps 7 such people in 61 years of living, and he had learned to recognize them. One more thing, he said. Is he physically safe? The pause before her answer told him she'd already assessed it. For now, the clinical team is professional. The risk isn't physical, it's legal. They're moving paper. I know what they're moving, Reed said. Thank you, Ms. Ford. Don't thank me yet, she said. Let's get him out first. The call ended. Reed stood in his kitchen for 30 seconds. Then he picked up his landline old habit, untraceable, and dialed a number from memory. When a groggy voice answered, he said, My office at 7 a.m. Call Marcus Venn. Use your personal phone. And get Bernard Holt before you do anything else. Reed what? Jack is awake, Reed said, and Catherine Drake just ran out of time. He hung up, put on coffee, sat at his desk, and began to work. By 3 a.m. he had a list. By 5 a.m. he had a strategy. By the time the sun came up, he had the beginning of something Catherine Drake, for all her preparation, had never seen coming. She had made the mistake every person who had ever underestimated Jack Carter had made. She had assumed that isolating him meant he was alone. Back in the hospital, Catherine arrived at 9. She was immaculate, composed, the performance of devoted grief dialed to exactly the right frequency. She held Jack's hand for anyone watching from the hallway. She spoke to Dr. Okafor in soft, careful tones about specialists and second opinions and how Jack would have wanted every option explored. Jack cataloged every word, filed it, moved on. Garrett arrived at 11 and met Catherine in the hallway. Their voices didn't carry fully, but enough. First tranche went through, Garrett said. Full amount, 41.8. Compliance flag on one sub-account. I pulled it before it triggered. In the second tranche, 48 hours. Make it 48. Footsteps. Then Catherine came back into the room, sat down, picked up her phone, and said without looking at the bed, I know you're in there somewhere, darling. I want you to know this isn't personal. She typed something. You built something worth having, and you were never going to share it properly. She set the phone on her knee, looked at him, really looked the direct way she almost never did, and for a single unguarded moment, Jack saw something cross her face that wasn't calculation. Exhaustion. Real human exhaustion. The weight of a long performance. It didn't make him forgive her. It made her briefly comprehensible, which was worse. Lucas came back that afternoon alone, and he was different again. The anxiety radiating off him was not the calculated tension of a co-conspirator, but something more chaotic, something close to panic. Something's happening, he said, standing near the window, not looking at the bed. Garrett called Catherine 20 minutes ago, and she went white. I've never seen Catherine go white. She's downstairs with the legal team right now, and nobody will tell me what's going on. He moved closer. Jack, I told you yesterday I didn't know about the car. I'm telling you again because whatever's happening in the next few days, that part was not me. His voice had gone rough. I think Catherine did something beyond the business, and I think I was the one being used to make it look broader than it was. He left without finishing the sentence. Jack lay still and processed what Lucas had just handed him. Lucas was scared. Lucas was fracturing. And Lucas, for all 30 years of his opportunism, had just shown Jack exactly where the crack in Catherine's alliance ran. 20 minutes later, Catherine came back like a pressure system entering a room. She closed the door. She stood at the foot of his bed. The composed fiancé mask was cracking at the edges, and what showed through wasn't grief or anger. It was the specific intensity of someone whose plan is running into resistance it didn't account for. Someone called Reed Andrews, she said. Someone gave him specific information about Garrett and the accounts in the timeline. She moved to the bedside. I need to know if any of your people have access to this room, Jack. Because if Reed gets to the board before Thursday, everything gets complicated. She looked at him, at his stillness, his silence, the blankness she had accepted as unconsciousness. And I don't want complicated. She left. Jack began working his hand toward the call button, and the moment the door closed. When Lily came in at 4 p.m., his finger was already moving before she crossed the room. She came to him directly, angled her body to block the door panel, held the notepad low. He spelled it out. CATHERNESSOMETHINGTELLREIDACCELERAT. Lily read it back without hesitation. I'll call him the moment I hit the parking structure. She made a routine notation on his chart. Straightened, said in her ordinary nurse's voice loud enough to carry, your pressure is slightly elevated today. Mr. Carter, nothing alarming. I'll have Dr. Okafor check in this evening. She walked out. Reed called back in 16 minutes. Lily relayed everything at the 6 p.m. check, her voice barely moving the air. Garrett's secondary account in Cayman was frozen at 3 p.m. SEC referral is drafted. Bernard Holt has been served and is cooperating. Reed says Thursday is too long. He needs you to hold 24 more hours. Jack pressed once. Yes. He also said, and I'm quoting, tell Jack the leverage on the Meridian clause is already burned. She has nothing to stand on. One press. Lily paused. He asked me to ask you one personal thing. He said you'd want to answer, even if it's hard. She looked directly at his face. He asked if you know whether the accident was Catherine. He said if it was, the legal strategy changes. The room held still. Jack moved to the board. YES. Lily read it. Her face didn't collapse. It set the face of someone absorbing something terrible and choosing to carry it forward. I'll tell him, she said quietly. She smoothed his blanket at the shoulder, the same small gesture she made every evening, the most consistent kindness anyone had offered him in 2 years, and said, 24 hours. Not a reassurance, a reminder. The difference mattered enormously to him, and she somehow knew that. Jack Carter stared at the ceiling and thought about the next 24 hours. He thought about Reed building the counteroffensive in real time. He thought about Garrett, who believed his money was clean. He thought about Lucas fracturing under the weight of what he had almost done. He thought about Catherine downstairs with lawyers searching for the leak, looking in every direction except the right one. She had never once considered the nurse. That single blind spot was going to cost her everything. The night moved in fragments, each one its own small eternity. At 3 a.m., Preston Hale made a mistake. He took a phone call in the hallway outside Jack's room, in the way people get careless at 3 a.m. when they believe the only witness is a man in a coma. His voice was low, but not low enough, and Jack, who had spent 18 days refining his ability to extract information from partial sound, caught every word. The Andrews issue needs to be contained before morning. If he gets the account documentation to the SEC, the Cayman freeze becomes permanent. A pause. The power of attorney is only as strong as the legal framework behind it. If Andrews can establish responsiveness in the first 72 hours, the whole proxy collapses. Another pause then. Tell Catherine we need a decision by 6 a.m. We either push the timeline or we cut the secondary. We can't hold both. The call ended. Jack processed this with the cold precision that had become his primary mode of survival in this bed. 3 things he hadn't known before: Reed had already delivered documentation to the SEC faster than even Jack had anticipated. The power of attorney was shakier than Catherine had shown, and she was about to be forced into a choice between her 2 remaining plays. Whichever one she sacrificed would be the one that unraveled her. He needed to get that to Reed before 6 a.m. The problem was that Lily's shift didn't start until noon. He spent 20 minutes assessing his options, arrived at the only one that remained, and began moving his hand toward the call button at the edge of the bed rail. 3 inches, 3 miles. He had been building motor function slowly, finger taps, letterboard, small, controlled movements, but this required a different pathway. One the compression had hit harder. He tried anyway. It took 40 minutes. By the time his palm grazed the button and triggered it, he was spent in ways that didn't show on the surface. The night nurse who came was not Lily. She checked his monitors, noted the call button activation as probable involuntary response, and left. Jack felt the loss of those 40 minutes like something physical. At 5:47 a.m., the door opened. He expected the morning orderly. He got Lily Ford, who was not supposed to be there until noon, who crossed the room quietly and said in barely a breath, "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the 24 hours." She pulled the letterboard from under her arm. "Reed called me at 4. He says if you have anything urgent, he needs it before 6. Jack moved to the board before she finished the sentence. PRESTONHALE, 3 a.m., CALLEDHALLWAY, POASHAKY, NEED, 72HOURPROOF. Lily read it back, already dialing. Reed answered on the first ring. She relayed everything: Preston's call, the 6 a.m. deadline, the 72-hour responsiveness window. She read from her notes with the precision of someone who understood that exact words mattered. Reed was quiet for 4 seconds. Then, "Tell him I already have the 72-hour proof. Okafor documented elevated stress responses in the first 48 hours, inconsistent with a vegetative state. I had a neurologist review the chart last night. She'll testify." A pause. "Tell him Catherine's window just closed." Lily relayed it quietly, watching Jack's face. He pressed once. Yes. Then he moved back to the board. ONEMORETHING, LUCASISBREAKING, USEHIM. Reed's response was immediate. "He called to my office at 11 last night. He wants a deal." A beat. "Jack, set aside whatever you're feeling about Lucas until Thursday. I need him functional." Lily looked at Jack. He pressed once. Reed heard it. "Good. Now tell him to rest. He'll need it." The call ended. Lily lowered the phone and looked at Jack with her level, honest attention. "He's right," she said. "You need to rest." He moved to the board one more time. THANKYOUFORCOMINGIN. She read it. Something moved across her face that she didn't quite manage to contain, and he was glad it had surfaced because it was real in a way that almost nothing in this room had been real for 18 days. "I told you," she said quietly, "you don't have to do this alone." She stayed 20 minutes sitting in the chair with her coat still on, not talking, not reading, just present. It was the most valuable 20 minutes Jack Carter had spent in years. At 6:15 a.m., Catherine made the wrong choice. Jack heard it happen through the door. She and Preston voices, not quiet enough. The specific carelessness of people who have been awake too long and are running out of room to maneuver. "We take the primary and cut Garrett loose," Catherine said. "If we cut Garrett, he talks," Preston said. "Let him talk. His exposure is greater. He moves the money, he's the principal." Flat, fast, decided. "The board votes are already lined up. If we push the succession protocol through before Andrews gets an injunction, the equity transfers regardless of what Garrett says afterward." A pause, and then the words that locked everything in place for Jack. "The only thing that stops us now is Jack waking up." Preston said something too low to catch. "He's not going to wake up," Catherine said, not cruel, indifferent. He was not a person to her. He was a condition to be managed. Jack breathed through the anger that rose in him, let it sharpen into something colder and more useful, and got back to work. Lucas came at 9. He came in with the energy of a man who had been awake all night, arriving at decisions, and he pulled the chair directly to the bedside close. No performance for any invisible audience. "I talked to Reed Andrews last night," he said. He let that sit there. "I know how it sounds. I know what it looks like." He rubbed his hands together, a gesture Jack recognized from childhood, from the boy Lucas had been before ambition had sanded away the recognizable parts. Reed said Jack would want to know that everyone still has a choice, which is the most Jack thing I've ever heard. So I'm operating on the assumption that you can hear me. He looked at Jack's face directly, long and honest. "Catherine had Marcus's brake line cut," Lucas said. The room went absolutely still. I found out last night, Preston's associate, 26 years old, apparently still has a conscience called Reed. Lucas's jaw worked. I didn't know. I would never. Marcus had 3 kids, Jack. 3 kids. His voice cracked on the last word, and he didn't try to recover it. I'm going to the board with everything I have. The Meridian emails, all of them. Reed is filing for an emergency injunction on Thursday's meeting. He stood. Bernard Holt is cooperating fully. Turns out the standing instructions Catherine claimed you gave him were partially fabricated. He figured it out when Reed's neurologist report landed on his desk this morning. He moved toward the door. Stopped. I wasted 30 years, Jack, he said. I'm not wasting what's left cleaning up someone else's disaster. A pause. Get better, I mean that. He left. At noon, Lily arrived. She was running on 2 hours of sleep and professional determination, and when she leaned in during her check, she said quietly, Reed says the injunction was filed at 10 a.m. Judge Chen is reviewing, ruling expected by 4. She straightened. He also said, and I'm quoting him directly, tell Jack that if he's ever planning on waking up now would be a good time. Jack moved to the board, TELLHIMIKNOW. Lily related, listened to Reed's response. The corner of her mouth did something that in a different context might have been a smile. He says he figured. At 2:15 p.m., Catherine came back. This time Preston was behind her, and behind Preston, a man Jack didn't immediately recognize, gray-suited leather document case, the studied neutrality of a professional witness. A notary. She had brought the notary again. Catherine sat. Preston stood at the foot. The notary positioned himself near the door. Jack. She used the soft voice, the one that had worked on him for 2 years because he had wanted it to work, because loneliness is the most exploitable human condition, and he had been lonelier than anyone around him had known. I need you to hear me. Whatever happens next, everything I've done has been to protect what you built. A pause. The lawyers need one thing, a handprint. The medical proxy statute allows reflexive hand movement as legal assent given your condition. Preston placed a document against Jack's right hand. One touch, Catherine said. That's all. Jack stared at the ceiling. He understood the mechanism precisely. A legal gray area, a professional witness, a document designed to capture any hand movement and interpret it as consent. Catherine had found a way to extract his signature from an unconscious man. She was 3 feet from winning. She had spent 18 days building toward this moment. And Jack Carter had spent 18 days building toward this one, too. He turned his head, the first voluntary, unmistakable movement he had made in 18 days. It cost him everything stored up in his body, every nerve signal. He'd been training and testing every ounce of concentration he'd hoarded. His neck muscles screamed. His vision went white at the edges. But his head turned fully deliberately, and his eyes open, clear, wholly alert, found Catherine Drake's face. The room stopped. Catherine's expression moved through 5 stages in 2 seconds. Confusion, recalibration, and then the specific terror of a person watching a structure they believe solid reveal itself as air. Preston stepped back. The notary made a sound that wasn't a word. Jack looked at Catherine the way he had looked at rivals across boardroom tables for 2 decades, steady, unhurried, absolute. His voice came out wrecked from 18 days of silence, rough and low, and barely more than a controlled rasp. But every syllable landed perfectly. Drop the document, he said, and get out of my room. Catherine didn't move for 3 full seconds. He watched her cycle through the remaining plays, could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, assessing whether there was still an angle, still a move. There wasn't. She knew it. And the knowing passed across her face like a shadow crossing a field. Jack, I said get out. Preston's hand was already on her arm, pulling toward the door with the instinct of a lawyer who recognizes the exact second a room has become a liability. The notary was already gone. Jack heard the door close soft and fast. Catherine stopped in the doorway. She turned back. Her face had gone quiet, not the performed quiet of her devoted fiancé role, but real quiet. The quiet of a woman standing at the absolute end of something. I would have run it well, she said. I want you to know that. I would have actually run it well. Jack held her gaze. You'll have plenty of time to think about that, he said. From wherever you end up. She left. The door closed. Jack lay in the silence and felt 18 days of weight beginning slowly to lift. Then he reached left deliberately fully, the movement of a man reclaiming his own body, and pressed the nurse call button. When the voice came through the speaker, he said in the rough, wrecked, absolutely certain voice of a man who had been silent long enough, "I need Dr. Okafor, and I need Lily Ford. Please." Down the corridor, he heard the ripple of disbelief move through the floor like electricity. 18 days of silence broken. The storm had arrived, and Jack Carter was still standing. Dr. Okafor came through the door with the measured pace of a man managing his own disbelief. He stopped at the foot of the bed, looked at Jack's open eyes, the deliberate set of his jaw, the hand resting, not lying, resting with full intention on the bed rail. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "can you tell me your full name?" "Jackson Allen Carter, date of birth November 14th, 1980, CEO of Carter Dynamics Incorporated in Delaware." A pause. "Do you need more, or is that sufficient?" Dr. Okafor exhaled slowly. "That's sufficient." He moved to the bedside and began a rapid neurological assessment, pupils grip response reflex, and Jack cooperated with the mechanical patience of a man who understood this documentation was not a formality. It was a weapon. "Your recovery is more advanced than the imaging suggested," Dr. Okafor said. "I've been tracking it myself," Jack said. "Every morning, testing what I could and couldn't move, monitoring the progression." He met the doctor's eyes. "I needed to understand my own timeline before I could determine anyone else's." Dr. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then, with the careful neutrality of a man choosing his words precisely, "Mr. Carter, I want you to know the care decisions made in this room were made in good faith based on the clinical presentation I observed." "I know that," Jack said. "You have nothing to answer for." The relief that moved through Dr. Okafor's face was real. "There are others in this building tonight who may not be able to say the same." "I know," Jack said. "That's being handled." Lily arrived 3 minutes later. She had been flagged in the corridor and briefed. He could tell by the way she came through the door, contained, professional for the thing she always was on this floor. But her eyes found his immediately, and what passed between them in that single second was not surprise or relief or any of the complicated emotions he might have expected. It was something quieter and more fundamental. Recognition. Two people who had been holding the same secret seeing each other in full daylight for the first time. "Mr. Carter," she said in her nurse's voice, "I heard you called for me." "Close the door," he said. She did. Dr. Okafor glanced between them, made a quiet professional calculation, and said, "I'll give you a few minutes, but I need to make some calls, your legal representative. Do you have a preference?" "Reed Andrews," Jack said. "His number is in my personal contacts." "Catherine has my phone. I'd appreciate it if you ensured she doesn't leave the building before those calls are made." Dr. Okafor looked at him steadily. Then he nodded once, the nod of a man deciding which side of a line he's standing on. He left. The room went quiet. Lily hadn't moved from near the door. She was watching him with the same direct, honest attention she'd had from the very first night, wholly without agenda, without calculation, without any of the layered performance that had filled this room for 18 days. 18 days, Jack said. 18 days, she agreed. "You never told anyone?" "No." "You came in at 5:47 this morning. Your shift starts at noon." She considered this straightforwardly. "I couldn't sleep. Someone needed watching, and I was the person watching." A pause. "That's not a complicated reason." "No," Jack said, "it's not." He looked at his hands, the right that had learned to speak for him, the left catching up. "Most people in my life have done things for very complicated reasons. It's been a long time since someone did something simple." She said nothing. She understood he had learned over 18 days when silence held more than words. "I need a few things from you," Jack said. "First, your full account. Every message, every letterboard session, every call with Reed. Documented and dated. My attorney will need it." "I kept notes," she said. "Every session, dates, times, exact content. I have them on my personal phone." He stared at her. "You kept notes." "I'm a nurse," she said simply. "Documentation is what you do, in case something goes wrong and you need to show exactly what happened." Jack Carter, who had built an empire on the belief that the right people instinctively do the right things without being told, felt something move through his chest that was warmer and considerably less controllable than strategic clarity. "Second thing," he said, keeping his voice level, What you've done here, I want to make sure it doesn't cost you your position. It won't, Lily said. You don't know that. I know what I documented and why, and I know what Dr. Okafor will find when he reviews the timeline. I didn't violate protocol. I observed a patient showing signs of responsiveness, and I responded appropriately. She held his gaze. I was careful. You were more than careful, Jack said. You were extraordinary. Something moved across her face, not embarrassment, more the expression of a person being seen in a way they hadn't anticipated. She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. Anyone would have done what I did, she said. No, Jack said. They wouldn't. I spent 18 days watching what people actually do when they believe no one important is looking. You are not anyone, Schroeben. You are a specific particular person, and what you did was specific and particular, and it did not happen by accident. She was quiet. Then Reed Andrews walked in and the room changed temperature entirely. He was 61, built like a former athlete who had traded physical mass for a different kind of density, the kind that comes from decades of decisions that mattered. He came through the door and stopped when he saw Jack sitting up in the bed, and the expression on his face was the only time in 18 days that Jack felt the full weight of what had actually happened. Because Reed's face, which Jack had known for over 40 years and which did not break easily, broke for approximately 4 seconds completely. Then Reed pulled it back together. You look terrible, Reed said. You look old, Jack said. Reed crossed the room in 4 steps and gripped Jack's right hand. Not a handshake, something beyond that, the grip of 2 people who have shared something that doesn't have a polite name, and Jack gripped Reed back with everything his recovering nerves could give. How long? Reed asked. From the first day. Reed closed his eyes, opened them. She told me you were completely unresponsive, that the prognosis was... He stopped. She said you might not make it. She was hoping for that outcome, Jack said. She may have done more than hope. Reed's expression didn't shift. Marcus. Yes. The word sat between them like a stone. I know, Reed said. His voice was controlled and terrible. The investigator confirmed it this morning. The brake line was cut clean, professional. Whoever did it knew cars. A breath. Catherine was in contact with a contractor named Dolan 6 weeks before the accident. Burner phone, but Dolan got sloppy on his end. The calls are traceable. Jack absorbed this without moving. He had known it since Lucas confirmed the accident wasn't accidental. But knowing intellectually and hearing it said aloud were different countries. And for a moment, he let himself be in the country where Marcus was alive and had 3 kids and had never once asked for anything, and had died because Jack Carter had trusted a woman he should have seen through 2 years ago. Dolan is in custody, Jack asked. As of 9 a.m., he negotiated before lunch. Reed's expression was flat and precise. He gave up Catherine in exchange for reduced charges. The DA's office is waiting for my call. Make it, Jack said. I wanted to wait until... Make the call, Reed. Reed pulled out his phone and stepped to the corner. In the hallway outside, Jack heard the organized urgency of people responding to instruction. Dr. Okafor's voice directing. Footsteps that were not hospital staff. The door opened. Catherine Drake was escorted in by 2 men Jack recognized by type before he knew their names federal, the particular bearing of people who carry authority they don't need to announce. She stopped when she saw Jack sitting up. She had already absorbed one version of this shock 2 hours ago when he told her to leave. But that had been personal. This had witnesses and federal witnesses at that, and even Catherine Drake's extraordinary capacity for real-time adaptation could not pivot to meet this. The architecture was gone. Every piece, every document, every account, every carefully arranged legal mechanism dismantled before she could use it. She looked at Jack. He looked at her. The DA has questions, one of the federal men said to Catherine, his voice professionally empty. I want my attorney, Catherine said. Preston Hale has been at the field office since 11 a.m., the man said. Something moved through Catherine's face at that, the specific expression of someone learning that the person they trusted to hold the structure up has already begun dismantling it to save himself. It lasted less than a second. Then the composure came back. Not the warm, performed composure of the devoted fiancée, but the real version, colder and harder, the Catherine Drake, who had always existed beneath the presentation. She looked at Jack one final time. You were listening the whole time, she said. Not a question, not an accusation, a statement delivered with something that in another person might have been respect. "Every word," Jack said. She nodded once, confirming something to herself. Then she turned and walked out with the two federal men, her posture straight, her head level, every inch the person she had constructed herself to be, even now, even here, even at the end of it. The door closed. Lily, without looking up from the blood pressure cuff she was removing from his arm, said, "Your pressure is high." "I'm aware. You should rest." "Not yet." She looked up. "Are you going to—" "There are still things to manage." She accepted this without argument. She understood he had come to know when pushing against reality was useful and when it wasn't. It was one of the rarest forms of intelligence he had ever encountered. Garrett Cole was arrested at 4:47 p.m. attempting to board a flight at JFK with a carry-on bag and the specific overconfidence of a man who believed his preparation exceeded everyone else's response. It didn't. When he was taken off the jetway, he said nothing, the smartest thing he'd done all week. Reed confirmed it at 5, and Jack filed it and moved to the next item. Because that was how you ran a sequence. You confirmed each step without stopping to feel it until there was time to feel it safely. That time came at 6 when Reed left to manage the board preparations, and Dr. Okafor finished his second assessment, and the room went quiet in the way it had gone quiet every evening for 18 days. Lily was charting at the small desk near the door, her back partially to him, her handwriting small and neat. "Lily," Jack said. She looked up. "When this is over. When I'm out of this bed and the legal process is running and the board is reset." He stopped, started again. "I don't have a language for what I want to say. I have languages for negotiation and confrontation and the specific professional warmth that maintains relationships without creating vulnerabilities. I don't have a language for this." Lily set her pen down. "Don't say it from a hospital bed," she said. "Whatever it is, say it when you're standing up." Jack looked at her for a long moment. "That's reasonable," he said. "I'm a reasonable person," she said. "I know," he said. "That's not the least of what I know about you." She held his gaze a moment. Something shifted in the room in the way rooms shift when two people acknowledge something without naming it. Then she picked up her pen and went back to her charting. He watched her write. Outside the hospital breathed its suspended rhythm. Jack Carter, who 18 days ago had been harvested over by everyone he trusted, was sitting up in his own bed in his own body making his own decisions. The paralysis was receding. His legs were beginning to answer. By morning, Dr. Okafor believed he might stand with assistance. Tomorrow, a board meeting. Lawyers, statements, a company to reclaim. The long aftermath of everything Marcus had died for without knowing any of it. Tomorrow, all of that. Tonight, a quiet room and a woman writing in careful handwriting at a desk near the door. Jack closed his eyes. For the first time in 18 days, he slept. And in the morning, he stood up. It took 3 attempts. Dr. Okafor's arm on one side, Lily's steady hand on the other. And on the third try, Jack Carter's legs held, and the room swam briefly at the edges and then steadied. And he was vertical for the first time in 19 days, standing on his own feet in the room that had been his prison and his classroom and his most important board meeting all at once. He stood still for a moment, let his body remember what standing meant. Then he looked at Lily, who was watching him with the level, open attention she had given him from the very first night, and he said quietly on his feet, as he had promised himself he would, "Thank you." She looked back at him. "You're welcome." A pause. "Don't fall." "I won't," he said. He didn't. Reed arrived at 8:30 with a clean shirt, a briefing folder, and the focused clarity of a man who has been preparing for a fight and is ready for it. He stopped when he saw Jack standing beside the bed, one hand on the rail, but standing, and the expression that moved across Reed's face was the one Jack had last seen on the night they'd survived their first hostile takeover, a man who has bet everything on something and just found out he was right. "Board meeting in 90 minutes, Reed said, recovering. "Then let's start," Jack said. He reached out and took the briefing folder from Reed's hand. His grip was steady. The board of Carter Dynamics convened at 10 a.m. in the 14th floor conference room of Hargrove Memorial's administrative wing. A room commandeered by Reed's legal team the previous evening, large enough for the 12 board members who made the quorum, small enough to feel like what it was, an emergency session called because the company's CEO had just spent 19 days pretending to be unconscious, while his fiancée dismantled everything around him. Jack came in a wheelchair, which he hated, but which Dr. Okafor had insisted on. Your legs are functional but not ready for 90 minutes on a conference room floor, he'd said with the precise authority of a man who had learned he could speak directly to Jack Carter and be heard. Jack sat at the head of the table because the head of the table was where he sat. The 12 board members looked at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to relief to the carefully managed neutrality of people who had been in very recent contact with Catherine Drake's legal team and were now recalculating every conversation. Franklin Marsh spoke first. He was 68, the longest-serving board member, a man who had known Jack's father and who had always treated Jack with the specific, complicated regard of someone measuring a son against a memory. Jack, he said, and then because he was Franklin, he didn't dress it up. How much of this did you know before it happened? None of it, Jack said. I knew Catherine was ambitious. I didn't know she was willing to kill for it. The room was completely still. Marcus Chen was my driver for 11 years, Jack continued. He had 3 children. His youngest is 4 years old. He looked around the table at each face unhurried. The brake line on his car was cut by a contractor hired by Catherine Drake 6 weeks before the accident. That contractor is in federal custody. Catherine Drake was arrested yesterday evening and has been charged with conspiracy to commit murder wire fraud and securities fraud. Garrett Cole was arrested attempting to board an international flight. Preston Hale entered a cooperation agreement yesterday morning. Franklin hadn't moved, and the $43,041.8 was recovered through the Cayman freeze. The remaining balance is being traced. The SEC filing went in 2 days ago. Federal investigators believe full recovery is probable. Franklin looked at his hands for a moment. Then, what do you need from this board, Jack? 3 things, Jack said. First, a formal vote to nullify all actions taken under the power of attorney Catherine Drake filed on my behalf during my incapacitation on the grounds that the document was fraudulently obtained and that I was not in fact unresponsive during the relevant period. Seconded before you finish the sentence, said Diane Cho from the far end of the table. The vote was unanimous. Second, a restructuring of the succession protocol. What we had before was a framework Catherine was able to exploit because it concentrated too much provisional authority in a single proxy. I want it distributed, checks at every level. I'll have Reed's team draft the language, but I want it ratified by this board within 30 days. Nods around the table. Franklin said, and the third thing, Jack looked at him steadily. Lucas Carter will be taking the position of Chief Operating Officer effective immediately with full board oversight and a 60-day performance review. The room shifted. He felt it, the surprise, the recalibration, a few exchanged glances. Lucas was part of the, Franklin started. Lucas brought me evidence, Jack said. He had documentation of the Meridian Clause manipulation, and he chose to deliver it to Reed Andrews instead of using it. He didn't know about Marcus. When he found out, he chose correctly. He paused. I'm not giving him the role because he earned it in any traditional sense. I'm giving it to him because I need people close to me who know exactly what they were almost willing to do and then pulled back from the edge. That kind of self-knowledge is genuinely rare. Franklin studied him. That's a very Jack Carter way of looking at it. Yes, Jack said, it is. The board voted 11-1, Franklin abstaining, which was his version of approval. Lucas was waiting in the hallway outside. He came in after the board members filed out, and he looked like a man who had been awake for 48 hours processing the distance between who he'd been a week ago and who he was standing in this room as now. I heard, Lucas said. Good, Jack said, Mon. Lucas looked at him for a long moment. I don't know how to... He stopped, started again. I spent 30 years convinced that if I just had access to what you had, I could prove I was worth it. I never once thought about what I was willing to do to get there. You thought about it when it mattered, Jack said. Barely. Barely counts, Jack said. More than you think. Lucas didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. 30 years of complicated history doesn't resolve in a single conversation, and neither of them was naive enough to believe this was resolution. It was a beginning. The kind of beginning that happens when 2 people stop carrying old stories about each other and agree to look at what's actually there. Lucas left to meet with Reed about the transition timeline. Jack sat in the empty conference room for a few minutes, which was something he almost never did. Sat still by choice with nothing requiring his attention. He looked at the surface of the table. At his hands, both of them, the right slightly more recovered than the left, but both present. Both his. He thought about Marcus. He would be at Marcus's family's door within a week, and there was nothing he could say that would be adequate to what Marcus had lost or what the children had lost, and he had already accepted that inadequacy as the irreducible weight he would carry forward. Some debts cannot be paid. They can only be honored imperfectly for the rest of the time you have. He thought about 19 days in a hospital bed, about what you hear when the noise of your own life finally goes quiet, about the empire he had built and the man he had become in the building of it, someone who was respected and feared and professionally admired and genuinely deeply alone. He had been alone in ways he hadn't let himself see. He had built walls and called them strategy. He had kept people at distances he'd called appropriate and necessary. He had run a company of 40,000 people and had truly trusted fewer than 3 of them. 2 of those 3 had been Reed and Marcus was gone. He stood up from the wheelchair, carefully with both hands on the table edge, feeling his legs test the weight. They held. He walked to the door. Not steadily, there was a slight drag in his left leg, and Dr. Okafor had said with characteristic precision that full recovery would require 6 to 8 weeks of physical therapy and a level of patience that Jack Carter would find personally offensive. Jack had accepted this with a nod and had already begun calculating how to compress the timeline. But he was walking. He found Lily in the corridor outside his room updating her chart at the nurse's station. She was in her work clothes, moving through the ordinary mechanics of her day, a day that had begun with a paralyzed CEO, sitting up in bed and speaking for the first time in 19 days, and would continue with the routine tasks of keeping other patients alive and comfortable and as whole as possible, because that was the work, and the work didn't pause for extraordinary circumstances. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. Then she looked again because the footsteps were different from the shuffle of the wheelchair that had been bringing him down this corridor an hour ago. Jack Carter was walking toward her under his own power, moving carefully, his left hand trailing the wall, and when he reached her, maybe 15 feet, maybe the longest 15 feet he had ever walked, he stopped. "I told you I'd say it standing up," he said. Lily set her chart down on the counter. "You kept a secret that wasn't yours to keep," Jack said. "You came in at 5:47 a.m. when your shift started at noon. You held a letterboard for a paralyzed man in a dark room and trusted that what he was doing was worth protecting before you knew anything about him. You did all of that without asking for anything back." He paused. "I've spent 43 years in rooms full of people who were always calculating what they could get from being near me. I had stopped believing the other kind of person actually existed." Another pause. "You reminded me that they do." Lily was quiet the way she was quiet when words would crowd something rather than clarify it. "I don't know what comes next," Jack said. "I have a company to rebuild, and a board to restructure, and a legal process that will take the better part of a year, and a recovery that my doctor says will require patience I don't naturally possess." He looked at her directly. "But when the noise settles, I'd like to know you, outside of this floor, without a letterboard, if that's something you'd want." Lily looked at him for a long, honest moment. "I work Tuesday through Saturday," she said. "I'm off Sunday and Monday." Jack felt something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. "I'll note that. You should know," she said. "I drive a 7-year-old Honda. I don't own property. My idea of a good evening is a decent book and food I made myself. I'm not going to become a different kind of person because of who you are." "I know that," Jack said. "That's the whole point." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she picked up her chart and said, in the brisk, warm, completely real voice of a woman who had things to do and intended to do them, "You should sit down before your left leg gives out. Dr. Okafor will blame me." "He won't," Jack said. "I'll tell him it was my decision." "It'll still be my problem," she said. He sat down. 3 weeks later, the criminal charges against Catherine Drake were formalized. Conspiracy to commit murder, securities fraud, wire fraud, obstruction. Preston Hale testified under his cooperation agreement and provided documentation that connected Catherine's communications with Dolan directly to the brake line failure on Route 9. Garrett Cole, facing federal wire fraud charges with a potential sentence of 22 years, provided detailed testimony about every financial transaction he had facilitated on her behalf, including the offshore structure, the Meridian Clause manipulation, and a secondary account in Luxembourg that the investigators had not yet found. Catherine's attorneys entered a not guilty plea and began the process of building a defense that everyone in the room, including Catherine, understood would not be adequate to the evidence. Jack did not attend the arraignment. He was in Detroit at Marcus Chen's family home, sitting at a kitchen table with Marcus's wife Elena and their 3 children, and he was not talking about money or legal settlements or any of the things he had spent weeks preparing to talk about. He was talking about Marcus, about 11 years of early mornings and long drives, and the particular trust that exists between a man and the person responsible for getting him from one place to another safely. About the Christmas parties and the envelopes Marcus had always refused, and the way Marcus had made every silence in a moving car feel comfortable rather than empty. Elena Chen was a strong woman who cried anyway. Her children listened. The youngest climbed into Jack's lap sometime around the second hour and fell asleep there, and Jack sat very still and held her and did not move her because some things are more important than discomfort. He stayed for 4 hours. He left knowing that this was the beginning of a commitment that would outlast the legal settlements and the public statements and everything else that Marcus's family would have, whatever they needed for as long as they needed it, not because it was adequate, but because it was what you do when someone pays the price for your survival without knowing they were paying it. Reed called him in the car on the way back. Board ratified the succession protocol, Reed said. Lucas signed his employment agreement this morning. He's already driving the operations team crazy, which means he's engaged. Good, Jack said. The SEC has formally cleared the frozen accounts for return, 41.8 plus interest. The Luxembourg account came in at an additional 6.3. That'll be split per the forensic accountant's recommendation. Whatever they recommend, Jack said. There's one more thing, Reed said. A journalist at the Financial Times has a story. Not the version we manage, the real version. The Coma, the letterboard. The nurse, they're running it Sunday. Jack was quiet for a moment. Let them, he said. Reed was quiet on the other end. You're sure? The story isn't about me, Jack said. It's about someone who sat in a chair next to a man she barely knew and read to him and then protected him when it cost her something to do it. He watched Detroit pass outside the window. That's a story worth telling. Reed let that sit. Then, how are your legs? Better, Jack said. I walked a quarter mile this morning, without the wall. Dr. Okafor's 6 to 8 weeks. I'm going to do it in 4, Jack said. Of course you are, Reed said, and the warmth in his voice was the warmth of 40 years of a man who has known another man long enough to love him exactly as he is. The Financial Times story ran on Sunday. It was 6,000 words carefully reported, and it focused, as Jack had understood it would, less on the corporate intrigue and more on the human center of it, on what it means to be a person with everything and still need someone to simply sit beside you, on the choice Lily Ford had made in a hospital room for a man she didn't know for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. Lily read it on her day off on her couch with coffee she'd made herself. When her phone began ringing, journalist people she didn't know. People she didn't know who had suddenly remembered they'd always meant to reach out. She silenced it and went back to her book. Jack had called her that morning before the story came out to tell her it was coming and to say what he should have said in the middle of it all, but hadn't yet found the language for that. What she had done had changed something in him that had been calcified for a very long time, that he had spent 18 days listening to people perform care, and her care had been the one real thing in the room, and real things in his experience were rarer and more durable than anything else. She had listened. Then she had said, Jack, yes, it's my day off. I'm making coffee. Stop being formal. He had laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in 19 days, and it came out rough and real and slightly surprised, like a muscle that had almost forgotten what it was for. Sorry, he said. Don't apologize, she said. Come over for dinner Sunday. I'll cook. You can bring whatever you want, but please don't bring something that arrives in a temperature-controlled box because I will be annoyed. I won't, he said. Good, she said. 7 o'clock. He was there at 7. Not early, not late, 7 o'clock exactly with a bottle of wine. He'd chosen himself in a book he thought she might not have read, in the slightly unfamiliar sensation of a man arriving somewhere as himself without the armor that had become so habitual over 43 years that he'd almost stopped knowing he was wearing it. The dinner was simple, good. Her apartment was small and warm and organized with the practical tidiness of someone who didn't have extra space but treated what she had with care. They talked for 4 hours, not about the hospital, not about Catherine, not about any of it, about books and what it was like to grow up in Ohio, and what it was like to grow up in Detroit and the particular shape that loneliness takes when you have surrounded yourself with so many people that you've stopped noticing it. When he left, she walked him to the door. "Next Sunday?" he asked. "I work Saturday," she said. "So yes, Sunday." He walked to his car in the cold November air and stood for a moment before he got in, looking up at the lit window of her apartment where she had gone back inside, and he thought about 19 days in a hospital bed, about all the things you hear when the noise of your own life finally goes quiet, about the empire he had built and how it had looked from a hospital bed when stripped of everything that wasn't essential, and about the particular irreplaceable quality of a person who walks into a dark room and simply does the right thing. Not for reward, not for recognition, not because they calculated the outcome, because it's who they are. Jack Carter got in his car and drove home through the city he had grown up in, and for the first time in a very long time, he was not thinking about what came next. He was thinking about right now, this moment, this city, this November. Cold, this particular life, which had nearly been taken from him and had been given back by circumstances he had not controlled and people he had not deserved. He thought, "I am going to be better at this." Not the empire, not the strategy, not the management of power and relationships at the careful distances he had always maintained. He thought, "I am going to be better at being a person." It was, all things considered, the most ambitious plan Jack Carter had ever made. And for the first time in a very long time, he was genuinely looking forward to finding out what happened next. The storm had come, and Jack Carter was still standing. And the woman who had made it possible didn't know his net worth, his reputation, or his enemies list. She only knew that he needed someone. That had been enough for her, and it turned out it was enough to save everything.